She came west to marry a man she'd never met. But what she found wasn't a wedding, it was a lie. A fire-gutted cabin and a silence so wide it could swallow a heart whole. Yet somehow Eleanor Rhodes stayed, and in the ashes of a broken promise, she built more than a home. She built a reason to fight, a place to belong, and a kind of love that never asked her to change. This is a story about scars, snow, and second chances. And a woman who didn't wait to be saved. She became the reason others survived. The wind smelled different out west. Not like back in Pennsylvania, where coal smoke clung to every breath and rain tasted like iron. No, this wind was dry and wide, carrying dust and silence in equal measure. Eleanor Rhodes stepped off the creaking stagecoach with her satchel pressed tight to her side and her boots sinking just slightly into the grit of the main road. The town of Garrison Hollow was little more than a line of buildings that leaned into the wind as if asking forgiveness for existing. It didn't look like the kind of place to start a life. But then again, neither had the last one. She stood still for a moment, adjusting her hat against the sun, and glanced around the small square. A few men lingered outside the saloon, watching with the loose suspicion reserved for newcomers. A girl about 12 sat barefoot on a bench, braiding a rope. And no one, not a single person, stepped forward with a name or a welcome. There was supposed to be someone here, a man named Thomas Rigby. The letters had started 6 months ago. Her advertisement in the Lancaster Courier had been brief but honest. 28, educated, practical, widowed, no illusions, seeking safety, purpose, and a home. The replies were mostly pitiful, some vulgar. One came with a sketch of livestock, as if she'd marry the goats too. But Thomas Rigby had written with plainness and care. He owned land, a small ranch west of Garrison Hollow. He needed someone to help manage it, someone who wouldn't ask for romance, just loyalty. Eleanor hadn't believed him at first, but his handwriting had been steady. His third letter had included a pressed wildflower. And when her mother died in August, leaving her with nothing but a small inheritance and more silence than she could survive, Eleanor packed what little she owned and wrote back. I accept. She waited until she had $42 in savings and a train seat west. Now standing in this cracked and dusty square, she realized something wasn't right. No one was looking for her. No sign, no horse, no man with her name on his lips. She approached the post office first. It was little more than a wooden window and a leaning rack of notices. A young clerk in an oversized vest looked up as she entered. Can I help you, ma'am? I'm looking for Mr. Thomas Rigby, she said, smoothing her voice. The boy blinked. Rigby? Yes, he wrote me letters. Said he owned a small ranch, northwest of town. I was to meet him here today. The clerk rubbed the back of his neck. Ma'am, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but Thomas Rigby's been dead near 5 months. Eleanor felt her knees soften. She grasped the counter without meaning to. Are you sure? Pretty sure. Shot in a card game last spring, down in Bannock. Came back in a pine box, buried right out by Miller's Field. She stared at him. I got letters, she said, from July through September. The clerk shifted. Then someone else wrote them, or the letters were old. I'm sorry. Her stomach sank slowly, like someone had poured a bucket of cold water through her ribs. She stepped outside, blinking in the brightness, her hands trembling around the leather strap of her satchel. She'd come all this way, to nothing. That night she slept in a cot at the back of the dry goods store. The owner, a sharp-eyed widow named May Colton, let her stay for 50 cents and offered stew that tasted mostly of onions. Eleanor didn't ask for charity. She sat straight, spoon slow, and kept her jaw tight. You got family? May asked, scrubbing the counter nearby. No, Eleanor answered. You got money? Enough. May studied her. You don't look like a fool. What happened? Eleanor hesitated, then told her, briefly, the story of the letters, the promise, the arrival. May didn't laugh. She just nodded slowly. You need work? She asked. I need a roof. You won't find one in town. Rooms are scarce. But there's a cabin up on the ridge near Larkspur Creek. Used to belong to a trapper. Left last winter and didn't come back. Eleanor looked up. Is it livable? Not without work. but it's yours if you can make it stand. The next morning, Eleanor walked. It took her most of the day to reach the cabin. The trail climbed steadily, winding past rock formations and narrow creeks, through stands of pine and juniper. Her boots blistered before noon. Her satchel grew heavier by the hour, but she didn't stop. The cabin came into view around dusk. It sat nestled between two trees, half sunken into the hill, the chimney leaning like a drunk, one shutter hanging askew. But it stood. That was enough. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first, mold, ash, and old blood. A fire had eaten part of the back wall. The roof had gaps. The floor creaked like a dying animal. But she didn't cry. She unrolled her blanket in the cleanest corner and lit her lantern. Tomorrow she would clean. Tomorrow she would begin again. The morning began with a splinter. She'd barely lifted the broken door frame when a sharp sliver embedded itself beneath her thumb. She hissed, dropped the board, and sucked at the wound instinctively. Blood rose, stubborn and bright. She wrapped it in cloth and kept going. There was no one else to do it. Eleanor cleared the ashes from the fireplace first, coughing through clouds of soot. Then came the torn canvas bedding, the mildewed crates, the busted stool missing a leg. She dragged it all outside and made a burn pile. By midday, her back ached and her knuckles were raw. By evening, the cabin had space enough to breathe. She found a rusted pump by the back slope and coaxed 3 buckets of cloudy water before the pipe wheezed dry. After boiling it, she drank a tin cup full slow, eyes shut, hands trembling. She didn't pray, not because she didn't believe, but because she didn't know what to ask for anymore. That night brought wind again. She sat by the small fire she'd managed to start, wrapped in 2 blankets and listening to the boards groan with each gust. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she ignored it. She'd make the flour last. The salt pork, too. May had given her a bag of oats and half a jar of honey. For being brave or stupid, haven't decided which. Outside, something moved. Not close, not urgent, but enough to still her breath. She rose slowly, rifle in hand. Through the shutter's crack, she saw nothing but trees swaying in the moonlight. Still, she didn't sleep until dawn. The 3rd day brought a man. He didn't knock. She spotted him through the trees just past noon. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat that looked stitched from shadows. He wasn't riding. Just walking, steady along the ridge trail, head low, boots kicking up dust. Eleanor didn't move. She watched from inside, rifle across her lap, breath shallow. The man didn't approach the cabin. He paused at a distance, 30 yards or so, looked once toward the smoke trailing from her chimney, then turned and kept walking. His limp was slight, but real. She watched until he disappeared among the pines. That night she found a bundle near the path, 2 pieces of split wood, dry moss for tinder, and a rusted tin cup half filled with dried apples. No note, no name. The days blurred after that. She repaired the shutters using broken crate wood and fashioned a crude latch for the door. The roof she patched with canvas and pine tar stolen from a wagon carcass she found downstream. Each task took hours, but each task made her feel more like she existed again, not just waited to be erased. And the man returned, not to the door, not to speak, but sometimes she'd spot him, standing on a rock outcrop, looking toward the valley. Other times she'd find small gifts, rabbit meat wrapped in cloth, a skein of twine, a tin of nails. Once, a handful of wild mint. She never saw him leave them. She never said thank you. But she began leaving things too. One morning she placed a slice of cornbread on a flat stone by the trail. The next day it was gone, and in its place, a folded square of oilskin with flint and steel inside. That night Eleanor dreamed of voices, a man's voice, low and quiet, saying nothing and everything. Then came the blizzard. It howled down from the north like something living, angry and full of teeth. Snow arrived in sheets, burying the trail within hours. Eleanor bolted the door, fed the fire, and waited. By the 2nd day, the roof creaked. By the 3rd, the door iced shut. By the 4th, she ran out of firewood. She wrapped herself in Levi's old scarf around her face and stepped into the white. The cold was a knife. She didn't make it 20 steps before her knees buckled. But then, a hand, strong, rough, pulling her up. She looked up into familiar eyes, gray as dusk, shadowed by a hat heavy with snow. He didn't speak. He just lifted her and carried her back. When she woke, she was warm. The fire was roaring. The door was shut. And he was sitting silently in the chair by the hearth, sharpening a blade with steady hands. "You're real," she whispered. He looked up. His voice was soft. "You shouldn't have gone out alone." "I had no choice." "You always have a choice." She sat up slowly. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Calder," he said at last. She nodded. "I'm Eleanor." Their eyes met across the flickering firelight. No promises, no apologies. But in that silence, something settled. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of it. The morning after the storm broke in slow degrees. First, the sound of melting, drips from the eaves, soft pops in the snow crust. Then the light, gray, cautious, but enough to outline the cabin's worn walls and smoke-darkened beams. Eleanor lay still beneath her blanket, watching her breath rise and vanish, eyes drawn to the shape by the hearth. Calder was there, still as stone, still watching the coals. She didn't speak at first, didn't want to break whatever thread kept him in that room. He noticed anyway. "You kept the fire going," she said finally, her voice hoarse from cold and sleep. He nodded, not looking at her. "Didn't want you freezing on my conscience." "That a heavy load?" "Your conscience." That made him glance up. Not smile, but close. "You have no idea." She sat up slowly, wincing as her muscles protested. The cold had settled into her spine like an old tenant. "I do, actually." Calder looked at her then, not curious, not probing, just present. Eleanor pushed the blanket aside and stood, legs shaking slightly, then moved to the small table. "I've got flour, little honey. If I can find the skillet under that pile of tools, I can make ash cakes." "You don't need to feed me." She didn't turn. "I know. I want to." There was silence, but not the heavy kind from before. This was tentative, an agreement made without words. He stayed. They didn't talk much that day. Calder repaired the door latch with surprising skill, cutting a new peg from a branch outside. Eleanor swept the corners, boiled water, and reorganized her crate pantry. Around midday, she caught him staring at the photograph pinned above the bed, faded, bent at the corners, a picture of Eleanor and her younger sister, both in straw hats, laughing mid-motion, the only piece of the past she'd carried from the East. "She looks like you," Calder said quietly. "She was better," Eleanor replied. "Braver. Died before I left." He said nothing more, and that silence told her he understood loss deeper than he let on. That night, as snow crept back over the windows, they ate by the fire. The ash cakes were dry but warm. Calder ate slowly, methodically. Eleanor sipped hot water with honey and leaned her head back against the wall, eyes half closed. "You been living up here long?" she asked. "Since before the war ended." "You were a soldier." "Scout." "Confederate?" "No." He looked at her then, not ashamed, just clear. "I fought where I was told. Left when it stopped meaning anything." Eleanor didn't press. "You came here to disappear?" "I came here to stop seeing the things I couldn't forget." She nodded. "That I understand." The next morning he was gone. No note, no sound, just the fire still burning, and the memory of his voice quiet and sure, echoing in the logs. She didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She just made tea, folded the extra blanket, and left the door unlocked. Just in case. The days returned to their rhythm. Eleanor chopped wood with more confidence now. She patched the last of the roof gaps and reinforced the root cellar trap door with nails Calder had left. When the wind picked up again, the cabin no longer groaned in fear. It stood. She hunted small game, boiled rabbit, salted it, traded dried herbs with a passing trapper for soap and needles. Every night she sat by the fire, working thread through torn sleeves, waiting for a sound on the path. It came on the 6th night. Not footsteps, a knock. She froze, then moved. He stood there, holding a sack of flour and a tin box. "I owed you a skillet," Calder said simply. Eleanor smiled. "Come in." They fell into a rhythm without ever naming it. He never stayed more than 2 nights at a time, but when he did, he fixed things. Quietly, thoroughly. A new hinge on the door, a set of shelves from old fencewood. He taught her how to lay a snare, how to recognize elk track from mule deer, how to sleep light but deep. In return, Eleanor cooked with more than just function. She made soup with dried sage and wild onions. She told him about her father's bookshop, about the smell of paper and ink, about the day her sister fell from a hayloft and laughed even as she broke her arm. He didn't tell many stories, but one night, as the wind howled outside, he said this. There was a boy, 9 years old, watched his father swing from a tree for stealing bread. That boy left the county at 13. Never went back. She looked at him for a long time. Is that the beginning of your story? He stared at the fire, numbered just the part that never leaves. She didn't ask for more, and he didn't leave that night. Spring made a quiet entrance. The snow melted slow. Patches of green emerged like bruises healing. Eleanor's hands were rougher now, her back straighter, her silence stronger. She wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. She was building something. And Calder, whether he meant to or not, had become part of the structure. He brought nails, a saw, chicken wire. One morning he handed her a shovel. You've got space for a garden. She looked at the frozen patch by the slope. You planning on staying long enough to see it grow? She asked. Calder's jaw shifted. If I did, would that be all right? Eleanor didn't smile, but she didn't say no. A week later, a shadow came down the trail. Not Calder, not a deer. A man on horseback, hard eyes, long coat, a familiar sneer. Eleanor stepped out with the rifle slung across her shoulder. He didn't dismount. You Eleanor Rhodes? I am. You're living on land last owned by Gideon Ward. That make you squatters or buyers? Neither, she said. I was given permission by the town clerk, and I've made it mine. The man spit in the dirt. Well, miss, seems Gideon's son don't care about permission. He's coming back for what's his, and he don't take kindly to women thinking they can own anything. Eleanor's finger tightened on the stock. Tell him, she said, steady as iron. He's welcome to try. The man laughed and rode off. But when Calder returned that night, she told him, and he didn't speak. He just cleaned the rifle without being asked, and bolted the door. Twice. The day after the warning, Eleanor started reinforcing the cabin walls. She didn't say anything to Calder, not when she hauled the extra boards in from the collapsed trapper's lean-to near the creek, not when she pulled every nail she could find from the old fence, and certainly not when she opened the chest beneath her bed to retrieve the revolver she hadn't touched since leaving Pennsylvania. But Calder knew. He watched her work with the same quiet steadiness he brought to every task. He didn't ask questions. He just handed her tools, held beams in place, and when she blistered her hand hammering in a particularly stubborn plank, he said nothing, just wrapped her palm gently in cloth and returned to his post. That was how they operated now, not with declarations, but with presence. By evening, the cabin no longer looked like a place waiting to be claimed. It looked defended, lived in, a home not given but built. The sky was pale the next morning, the color of old parchment. Eleanor woke early, head thick with dreams. Calder had already gone to check the snares. She brewed tea, let it steep too long, then sat in the doorway watching the creek below thaw line by line. She didn't hear the approach until the girl stepped onto the porch. Barefoot, no coat, hair in 2 rough braids, maybe 10, maybe younger. She just stood there. Eleanor stood slowly, heart climbing into her throat. Hello? The girl didn't speak. Her lips were blue, her eyes too wide for her face. Eleanor stepped forward, lowering to one knee. Where did you come from, sweetheart? The girl blinked, then pointed behind her. That's when Eleanor saw the blood. It wasn't hers. It streaked along the hem of her dress, smeared in handprints. Eleanor's instincts snapped into motion. She took the child gently by the hand and led her inside, wrapping her in a wool blanket, stoking the fire, pouring warm tea with honey. Are you hurt? She asked. The girl shook her head. Did someone hurt you? The girl hesitated, then nodded once. Eleanor crouched beside her. What's your name? The girl's voice was a whisper. Marta. That was all she said. Calder returned an hour later with a rabbit slung over his shoulder and snow in his beard. The moment he stepped through the door and saw the girl, he stopped. Eleanor stood. She just appeared. She's scared half to death. Calder knelt beside the fire, his voice low and even. "Where did you come from, Marta?" The girl looked at him, eyes flicking over his knife, his boots, his scar. She didn't answer, but her hands trembled less now. Eleanor set a bowl of soup in front of her. "We'll let her rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll find out more." Calder nodded. "You think this is connected?" Eleanor didn't answer right away, but her grip tightened on the spoon. "I think too much is happening at once." That night, Eleanor barely slept. She sat in the rocking chair beside the hearth, watching the child's chest rise and fall under the wool blanket. Marta didn't stir. She slept as if she hadn't in days. Calder stayed at the door, rifle across his lap. They didn't speak, but in that silence something passed between them. Not just worry, but resolve. At dawn, the girl finally spoke. "My pa, he owed a man." Eleanor sat at the table with her, gently braiding her hair. "Who?" "Big man, with a scar on his neck. Said we could live in the barn if Pa gave him half the feed." "What happened?" Marta's voice cracked. "He took everything. Said Pa was slow. Hit him. Took our horse. Then Pa told me to run." Her hands tightened. I think he's dead." Eleanor closed her eyes. Calder stood by the door, jaw clenched. "Was the man's name Ward?" he asked. Marta looked at him, then nodded. "Edgar Ward." By noon, Calder had packed supplies. "I'll go down into Garrison, ask questions, find out if anyone's seen this Edgar." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "It's a risk." "I know. She just got here. You leave, and if he comes back, you'll handle it," Calder said gently. "You always do." She looked at him then, not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper. "Come back." "I will." He touched her shoulder before he left, and for the first time since he'd entered her life, Eleanor wished he wouldn't go. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. Marta stayed close, never more than 10 feet from Eleanor. She helped with chores, fed the chickens, even gathered kindling without being asked. She didn't smile, but she stopped flinching at every shadow. And Eleanor, for the first time in years, felt herself stretched beyond survival. She found herself humming while sweeping. She braided Marta's hair every morning. She taught her how to mix flour and water and pinch salt just right. But at night she didn't sleep well, because Calder hadn't come back. On the third night, the door shook. Not a knock, a fist. Eleanor moved fast, rifle in hand. Marta ushered behind the bed. Then the door opened. It was Calder, bleeding. He stumbled in, dropped the rifle, and leaned against the table before collapsing. Eleanor caught him before he hit the floor. She worked for hours, cleaning the wound in his side, binding it with clean rags, giving him broth by the spoonful once he woke enough to drink. He didn't speak much, only one word: ambush. She stayed beside him through the night. Her hands never shook. Her heart did. When dawn broke, he finally spoke fully. "Ward knows about the cabin." Eleanor didn't ask how. "He said no woman runs him off land his father owned. Said he's coming. Said I was just the message." Eleanor stood slowly. Her voice was calm. "I hope he brings help." Calder looked at her and smiled, because he knew that tone. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The storm didn't return that night, but the cold did. That hard, bone-deep kind that creeps in under doors and settles behind your heart. Eleanor rose before sunrise, stoked the fire higher than usual, and checked Calder's bandages in silence. His fever hadn't worsened, but he was pale beneath his stubble. Still breathing, though. Still stubborn. Marta watched from the corner, wrapped in 2 blankets, her dark eyes scanning Eleanor's every move like they might learn something about strength. "Will he die?" she asked, voice just above a whisper. Eleanor didn't pause. "Not while I have anything to say about it." She split wood after breakfast, hard and fast. Her hands ached, her breath caught in the frigid air. But she kept swinging, not just for fuel, but for fury, for focus, for the part of her that was done being frightened. It wasn't just survival now. It was hers. The land, the walls, the girl sleeping by the fire, the man groaning in fever. It was hers, and no man named Ward was going to take it from her. When she returned inside, Calder was awake, barely. "You shouldn't be moving," she said gently, crouching beside the cot. "I've survived worse," he murmured, voice gravel-scraped. "Twice. You're not impressing anyone." His eyes cracked open, and for a moment they smiled even if his mouth didn't. "You're still here." "I live here." After this. She reached for the cloth beside the basin, rinsed it, and pressed it to his forehead. "You don't get to die after making yourself useful." He chuckled once, winced, and winced again. Not the best motivator. "It's the only one you get." That afternoon, she taught Marta to shoot. They set up broken tin cans on a fence post behind the cabin. Eleanor's rifle was long for the girl's arms, but Marta listened well. Didn't flinch at the recoil. Didn't cry when she missed. "You're small," Eleanor said, correcting her stance. "That's an advantage. Most men don't see danger in a child." Marta looked up at her. "I'm not a child." "No," Eleanor said. "You're not." The last shot rang truer. Marta smiled for the first time since arriving. Inside, Calder slept, dreamed, fought in whispers. Sometimes Eleanor caught his words. "Left flank. Smoke coming. Get down." And once, "Not again." She sat beside him through the worst of it, cool rag in hand, humming an old tune her mother used to sing. Not to calm him, though it did, but to keep herself from unraveling. Because she was tired, so tired. But she couldn't afford to break. The next day brought hoofbeats, far off, echoed by hills. She heard them before she saw the riders. Two silhouettes cutting across the ridge, moving slow but steady. Not scouts, not hunters. Men with purpose. Marta ran to the window, froze. "That's him, the one with the red coat." Eleanor pulled her away, calmly, firmly. She didn't panic. She didn't speak. She just bolted the door, then the window shutters, then moved to the root cellar and pulled up the trapdoor. "Marta, I want you down there." "But no, you don't come up unless I say. Do you hear me?" Marta nodded, trembling. Eleanor kissed her forehead. "You're brave, and you'll need to be quiet now." The girl vanished into the dark. Eleanor closed the door, secured it, then stood and breathed. She waited by the fire, rifle across her knees. The knock came soft, like an afterthought. She opened the door slowly. Two men stood there. Ward in the red coat, dark beard trimmed like a man who liked the sound of his own voice, and a younger man behind him with twitchy hands. "Miss Rhodes," Ward said almost pleasantly, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. You're not welcome here. I came to offer terms. I don't recall requesting them." He smiled. "You've got something on my land. You sold this land, legally. My father sold a corner, not this. You had no interest in it until a woman made it worth wanting." Ward's face didn't change. That told Eleanor everything. Behind her, Calder stirred. She didn't turn, but she knew he'd heard. "Your man there owes me blood," Ward said. "But I'm a generous sort. I'll let you leave, tonight. Take the girl if you want. Just don't be here when I return tomorrow." "And if I am?" Ward's smile widened. "I'll bring friends." She closed the door in his face. No shouting, no threats. Just silence. A silence that boiled hotter than fire. When Calder sat up again, Eleanor helped him drink. "You heard?" "I heard enough. We have a night." He nodded. "That's more than we had yesterday." She looked at him, really looked. "You should have stayed away." "So should you." They both smiled, thin, wry, tired, but still there. That night they prepared. Calder showed Marta how to string a tripline across the front path. Eleanor loaded cartridges. They cut firing lines in the snow with a broken shovel. Dug a shallow pit behind the shed. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. But she did one thing she hadn't in years. She prayed, not for victory, but for enough time to make losing worth it. Dawn came slow, light bleeding pink across the hills, and with it, hoofbeats again. Eleanor stood at the window. She didn't shake. She didn't weep. She just said one word, quiet as breath. "Now." They came with the fog. Not loud, not like stories told in saloons with bravado and empty glasses. No wild shouting, no galloping charge, just the low thud of hooves muffled by damp earth, the whisper of cold breath in the morning air, and the quiet certainty of men who believed they would leave with blood. Eleanor stood behind the window shutter, her rifle angled through the narrow crack Calder had cut with his hunting knife the night before. He lay stretched beside the hearth, a pistol in one hand, eyes sharp despite the pain etched into his brow. Marta crouched behind the pantry crates, clutching a smaller revolver, safety on as instructed. 4 men rode into the clearing, Ward in front, his red coat bright against the mist. 2 held shotguns. 1 carried a coil of rope that bounced against his saddle like a snake waiting to strike. "They're confident," Calder muttered, voice low. "Good," Eleanor replied. "Confidence makes men slow." The riders didn't dismount immediately. They sat for a moment, surveying the cabin, the smoke curling from its chimney, the faint trace of footprints in the snow. Then Ward raised his hand, and the others fanned out. The first shot didn't come from the cabin. It came from Ward's man to the left. He fired a warning round into the air, likely to rattle them. The echo cracked across the trees, sending birds fleeing from the branches. Eleanor didn't flinch. She waited, breath steady, finger poised. The second man moved forward. That was his mistake. A tripwire caught his horse just past the root cellar. The animal reared, whinnying in panic, and the rider toppled sideways, hitting the ground with a grunt and a thud. Eleanor's shot rang out before he could recover. He didn't rise again. 3 left, Calder murmured, 1 circling wide. "I see him," Ward cursed, wheeling his horse around to bark orders. But before he could realign the attack, Eleanor fired again, her bullet striking his thigh. He fell from the saddle hard, landing in a heap, cursing and gasping. The man with the rope charged forward, gun raised. Marta, hidden in the shadows, waited until he was almost to the porch. Then with trembling hands she fired. The first shot missed. The second didn't. He stumbled back, dropping his weapon and howling in pain, clutching his side. The clearing went still. Inside the cabin, Eleanor turned to Calder. "Can you hold the front?" "Long enough," he replied. "I'm flanking." He didn't try to stop her. She slipped out the back, moving low through the snow, circling the cabin wide. The man who'd gone around was just stepping into view near the barn when she caught him in profile. Too late, he turned. She fired once, clean. He fell backwards, his hat landing a few feet from his body. Only 1 left. Ward was dragging himself toward his fallen rifle. Eleanor walked forward, slow, rifle aimed. "Don't," she said. He stopped, panting. "You're going to kill me?" he spat. "That it?" "No," she said. "I'm going to let you leave, but not with pride, and not with anything you came for." Ward laughed bitterly. "You think this changes anything? You think a woman with a gun makes the law different?" "No," she replied, "but it makes you afraid, and that's a start." She kicked his weapon away and motioned with her rifle. "Crawl back to your horse, or bleed here." He met her eyes and crawled. By the time the sun had fully risen, the clearing was quiet again. 3 men dead, 1 limping away into the trees, Ward trailing blood, disappearing into the valley beyond. Eleanor stood in the silence, chest heaving, rifle heavy in her arms. Then the door opened. Calder leaned against the frame, pale but standing. "You all right?" he asked. She looked at him, blinking hard against sudden tears. "No," she said, "but I'm alive." They buried the bodies behind the barn, not out of respect, but because winter would bring scavengers, and Eleanor didn't want Marta waking to wolves. Calder worked beside her, slower than usual but insistent. After the graves were filled, he didn't speak for a long time. Neither did she. They didn't have to. That night, Marta curled beside Eleanor by the fire, thumb tucked under her chin like a child again. Calder sat across from them, sharpening his blade with slow, precise strokes. "You didn't have to stay," Eleanor said softly. Calder looked up. "I didn't have anywhere else to be." "You could have run." "I did. For years she studied him." "You done running now?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, "Only if I've got something to run to instead." She reached for his hand, held it, and neither of them looked away. The next morning, Eleanor stepped outside to the clearing, her boots crunching softly in the frost. She looked at the land, scarred, still, hers, and knew something had shifted, not just in the world, but in herself. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was choosing to stay, to fight, to build, and maybe, just maybe, to love. The cabin was quiet, not the silence of fear or waiting anymore, but something else, something earned. The kind of quiet that comes after storms, after grief, after bullets have been counted and blood washed from the porch. Eleanor woke to the scent of coffee, real coffee. She sat up slowly, blanket falling from her shoulders, and saw Calder by the stove, moving with care, a hand pressed to his side where the wound still ached, but no longer bled. "You're on your feet," she murmured. "Barely," he replied. "But for coffee, I'd climb a mountain." She smiled. "That desperate, huh?" "Always." He poured her a cup, and they sat across from one another, watching steam rise and curl like ghosts with nowhere left to go. Marta emerged next, rubbing sleep from her eyes, dragging a worn quilt behind her. Calder handed her a cup of hot milk. Eleanor brushed a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "You're safe." Marta nodded, still not speaking much, but there was no more tremble in her hands. That was enough. Later that day, a rider came from Garrison Hollow. A boy no older than 16, breathless and sweating through his vest, slid from the saddle and handed Eleanor a folded note sealed with the stamp of the town council. She read it in silence. Then again. Then once more. "What is it?" Calder asked from the porch. "They want to meet," she said. "Officially tomorrow morning, at the hall." "What for?" "To decide if I have the right to stay." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the rocking chair long after the others had gone quiet, her fingers tight around the armrest, her mind circling old wounds. This land had been promised, then threatened. Now it was being questioned, by men who hadn't lifted a hammer, who hadn't faced down Ward, who hadn't buried 3 bodies in frozen ground. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but something in her had hardened like fire-baked clay. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't explain. If they wanted to vote, let them. She had nothing left to prove, but everything left to protect. The next morning she rode to town with Calder beside her. He wore his old coat, patched at the shoulder, and carried the rifle not as a threat but as a symbol. Marta stayed behind with May Colton. Eleanor had sent word ahead. The older woman had nodded without a word, simply setting an extra place at the table. They arrived at the hall just before noon. People were already gathered. Farmers, shopkeepers, ranch wives, even the blacksmith and his twins, still dusty from the forge. Eleanor dismounted and walked up the steps like she owned them, because in her heart she did. Inside, the town council sat at a crooked table. 5 men, 1 woman. The chair, a barrel-chested man named Burris, cleared his throat. "Miss Rhodes, we appreciate you coming." Eleanor nodded once. Burris looked down at the page in front of him, like it held answers he hadn't studied for. "There have been concerns about your residency. The land wasn't properly deeded. There was violence, graves, and—" "Let me stop you there," Eleanor said, voice even. A ripple moved through the room. "I came here on a promise. That man lied. He's dead now. His lies buried with him. But I stayed. I built. I defended what was mine when no one else did. I fed a child who had nowhere else to go. I kept your ridge from being overrun by a man who would have taken it from any one of you next." She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of those gathered. "And if you think I don't belong here, say it plain. But know this, whatever vote you cast, I'm not leaving." Burris blinked. "You threatening us?" "No," Calder said, stepping forward. "She's telling the truth. And if any of you had the spine to ride up there during the storm, you'd already know it." Silence. Then May Colton stood. "She saved that girl. She bled for land no one else wanted. You want to vote against her? Fine. But do it knowing you'll have to explain to your wives why you ran off the only one among you with guts enough to stand when it counted." Another silence. Then the blacksmith raised a hand. "I vote she stays." So did the baker, the school teacher, and one by one the hands rose, until only Burris was left. He looked around, then sighed, and lifted his own. When Eleanor stepped out into the sunlight, the applause didn't come loud, but it came. A few claps, a nod from the saloon owner, a wave from a child. It wasn't celebration, it was respect. And that was enough. That night back at the cabin, Calder made stew. Marta read aloud from one of Eleanor's old books. Halting, careful, but proud. And when the fire burned low, Calder took Eleanor's hand and led her outside. The stars were brilliant overhead. No moon, just light scattered across eternity. He turned to her, eyes soft. "You gonna stay mad if I ask something?" She raised a brow. "That depends." He took a breath. "I want to build another room, off the west wall, something small, for me. Unless," he hesitated, "unless you'd rather I stay in yours." She didn't answer, not with words, just reached up and kissed him, quiet, certain, and long. Weeks passed. The garden was planted. The chickens laid better than expected. Marta laughed more. Calder limped less. And one morning, while chopping wood, Eleanor paused to look at the cabin. Not as a place that held her pain, but as something else now. A home, not promised, not given, but built, piece by piece, with calloused hands and stitched-together hearts. And in that moment, with the smell of cedar in her nose and the echo of hammers in her memory, she knew. She hadn't come west to find a man. She'd come to find herself. And she had. Right here, in the ashes, in the silence, in the fire she refused to let die. She didn't come for love, but she found it. Quiet, steady, scarred, and strong. She didn't come to be a mother, yet a child found her in the woods. She didn't come to be a hero, yet by the end, even the town had to raise their hands and say, "She stays." If this story lit a fire in you the way Eleanor's did for Calder, tell us in the comments. Have you ever stayed when it would have been easier to leave? Have you ever built something from nothing just because you refused to give up? We read every single word, so go on. Leave one behind.